Am I being charged for the crime? Because he's recording me, and I'm not comfortable with that. No. And if I am, I'd like to contact a lawyer.
Soldiers in the United States are meant to be guardians of freedom. Disciplined, courageous men and women who swear to defend the Constitution, protect the nation, and stand for the ideals of liberty, duty, and sacrifice, even at great personal cost. Katie Blauvelt was just 22 years old when she married John Blauvelt, a U.S. Army recruiter stationed in South Carolina. She was young, still figuring out who she was, still imagining the kind of life she wanted to build. The marriage moved quickly, and almost immediately, it became clear that their expectations of married life were very different. John's home became a place where teenagers frequently gathered.
Okay, that's the spot. What's the spot? Hangout spot.
Alcohol was common. Drugs were present. What should have been a private space for a newly married couple turned into something chaotic and unpredictable. For Katie, the environment felt unsafe and overwhelming. Katie became increasingly unhappy. Arguments became frequent. She began to feel isolated, unheard, and trapped in a marriage that no longer felt stable or supportive. Eventually, she moved out. Katie left the marital home and began staying elsewhere, making it clear that she wanted a divorce. John's military career was already under strain, and the collapse of his marriage added to his resentment. He blamed Katie for his personal and professional problems. Despite their separation, John continued contacting her. At times, the communication seemed practical. Discussions about belongings, logistics, unfinished business. At other moments, it was tense and emotionally charged. On October 25th, 2016, John contacted Katie and asked her to meet him. He told her he wanted to talk, to resolve lingering issues, to retrieve items. There was nothing outwardly dramatic about the request. It did not sound like a trap. It sounded like unfinished business between two people ending a marriage. Katie agreed to meet him. What she didn't know was that John had chosen the location carefully. He drove her to an abandoned farmhouse in Simpsonville, South Carolina. A secluded property, isolated from neighbors, far from immediate help. It was a place where no one would hear what happened next. Inside that farmhouse, John attacked her. The violence was sudden and overwhelming. Katie was stabbed multiple times. One knife blade broke off and remained lodged in her neck. After killing her, John did not call for help. He did not report an accident. He did not leave her where she fell. Instead, he attempted to hide what he had done. In the basement of the farmhouse, there was a concrete container. John placed Katie's body inside it, attempting to conceal her remains. He left her there, sealed away, and walked out of the building alone. For days, Katie was missing. Her family and friends grew increasingly alarmed when they could not reach her. This was not normal behavior for her. She had plans. She had been in contact with people. She was trying to move forward with her life. When she stopped responding, concern quickly turned into fear. Law enforcement began looking into her disappearance, and very quickly, John became a person of interest. Then John disappeared too. Instead of cooperating with investigators, he fled. He abandoned his military post, effectively deserting the army. His disappearance confirmed what investigators already suspected, that Katie's disappearance was not voluntary, and that John was running from something far worse. As police searched for Katie, they eventually discovered the abandoned farmhouse. Inside the basement, they found the concrete container. Inside that container was Katie Blauvelt's body. The discovery transformed the case from a missing persons investigation into a murder hunt. And now the focus shifted entirely to one question. Where was John Blauvelt? But he was not alone. As investigators began piecing together his movements after the murder, they uncovered another disturbing detail. John had fled with a teenage girl named Hannah Thompson, just 17 years old at the time. She was with him as he crossed state lines, as he abandoned his old identity, and as he began a life on the run. Why she went with him, what she knew, and how much she helped him would later become one of the most controversial aspects of the case. But at this point in the story, none of that was known. All that was known was this: a young woman trying to leave a dangerous marriage was dead. Her husband had vanished, and the man sworn to uphold order had become a fugitive accused of murder. When John Blauvelt drove Caddy to that farmhouse, did he already know she would never leave it alive? By the time Caddy Blauvelt's body was discovered inside the concrete container in the basement of the abandoned farmhouse, investigators no longer had any doubt about the direction of the case.
This defies any kind of logic that I have experienced in my 62 years on this earth.
The scene told them everything they needed to know. This was not an accident. It was not a sudden loss of control followed by panic. The attempt to hide her body, the choice of location, and the condition in which she was found all pointed to intention. John Blauvelt was now the primary suspect in a homicide. When police attempted to locate him, they learned that he had abandoned his military duties and left the state. His phone was off. His vehicle was missing. There was no indication that he planned to return. To investigators, this wasn't just flight. It was confirmation that he knew exactly what he had done. As law enforcement began reconstructing John's movements after the murder, they uncovered something that complicated the case and disturbed them deeply. John had not fled alone. Traveling with him was Hannah Thompson, a 17-year-old girl who had been involved with him prior to the murder. The age difference alone raised alarms. So did the timing. Hannah was last seen with John shortly after Caddy's death. Surveillance footage, financial records, and witness statements placed them together as they left South Carolina and began moving west. At that point, investigators did not know whether Hannah was a victim herself, a willing accomplice, or something in between. What they did know was that a grown man accused of murder was traveling across state lines with a minor. Local law enforcement contacted federal authorities. The U.S. Marshals Service became involved. John was now wanted not only for murder, but also for desertion. His photograph was circulated nationwide. Alerts were issued. Tips began coming in from across the country, but none led to an immediate arrest. John was careful. He avoided places where he could easily be identified. He paid in cash. He stayed off social media. He moved frequently. The goal was not comfort. It was invisibility. And for a time, it worked. Meanwhile, Hannah remained with him. Investigators later learned that during those early months on the run, John exerted heavy influence over her. He controlled where they went, what they did, and how they lived. Whether she understood the full scope of what he had done was unclear, but she was clearly helping him evade capture. She used false information. She stayed silent. She stayed with him. As the months turned into years, the trail grew colder. John changed his appearance. He used aliases. He worked under the table. He blended into small communities where questions were rare and people kept to themselves. To the outside world, he looked like just another transient trying to get by. But behind that facade was a man constantly watching for signs that the past was catching up to him. Back in South Carolina, Caddy's family was left with grief and unanswered questions. They attended court hearings where John's seat remained empty. They listened to updates about leads that went nowhere. They lived with the knowledge that the man responsible for her death was still free, still breathing, still moving through the world while their daughter, sister, and friend was gone forever. For them, there was no closure, only waiting. As time passed, Hannah and John eventually separated. The details of that separation would later become critical to the case. When Hannah was finally located, she was no longer with him. She was found alive. She was safe. And she began talking. What she told investigators helped confirm what they had already suspected.
We know more than you think we do.
John had been methodical, deliberate, and determined to avoid capture at all costs. He had planned his escape as carefully as he had planned the crime itself. With Hannah no longer at his side, John became more isolated. And isolation breeds mistakes. Years after the murder, a tip finally came in that mattered. John was living under a false name in Oregon. He had settled into a quiet routine, working, blending in, and avoiding attention. To those around him, he appeared unremarkable. But to the U.S. Marshals, he was still a fugitive. In July 2022, federal agents moved in. John Blauvelt was arrested without incident in Medford, Oregon, nearly 6 years after he killed his wife and fled. He did not resist. He did not confess. He simply went into custody, ending a years-long manhunt that had stretched across the country. He was extradited back to South Carolina to face trial. For the first time since Caddy's death, her family knew where he was. But knowing his location did not erase the damage he had done, and it did not answer the questions that still lingered about motive, planning, and accountability. As the case moved toward trial, prosecutors prepared to lay out the full story. What happened inside the farmhouse, why John did what he did, and how far he was willing to go to escape responsibility. And looming over everything was another unresolved question, one that would divide public opinion and haunt the courtroom proceedings. What role should Hannah Thompson be held responsible for in helping a murderer stay free for 6 years? When John Blauvelt was returned to South Carolina, the case that had haunted investigators and Caddy Blauvelt's family for nearly 6 years finally moved forward. The man who had vanished after the murder was no longer an absence or a photograph on a wanted poster. He was physically present, sitting in custody, forced to face the evidence he had tried so hard to outrun. Prosecutors began laying out the case methodically. They detailed the state of the marriage, the separation, and Caddy's repeated attempts to distance herself from John. They showed how she had moved out, how she had spoken openly about divorce, and how her fear of him had grown in the weeks leading up to her death. They introduced prior reports of threats and intimidation, including incidents that demonstrated John's capacity for violence and his need for control. Then they turned to the day she disappeared. Investigators explained how John contacted Caddy and asked her to meet him, framing the meeting as a chance to talk and resolve remaining issues. They described how he drove her to the abandoned farmhouse, a location that was not random, not accidental, but isolated and known to him. There were no witnesses, no nearby neighbors, no immediate help. Inside that farmhouse, prosecutors said, John killed her. The medical examiner testified about the wounds, the force involved, and the broken knife blade left lodged in her neck. They explained that this was not a single impulsive strike, but a sustained attack. And then they described what came after, the effort to conceal her body inside a concrete container in the basement. This was not panic, prosecutors argued. This was a calculation. The jury heard how John left the scene, abandoned his military post, and immediately went on the run. They were shown evidence of his movements across state lines, the steps he took to avoid detection, and the false identity he used to stay hidden. Each decision reinforced the same conclusion. John knew exactly what he had done, and he was determined not to face the consequences. John did not testify. He sat silently as the details of the murder were laid out, as photographs were shown, and as Caddy's family listened to the final moments of her life being reconstructed in a courtroom. For them, the trial was not just about guilt. It was about being forced to relive a loss they had already endured for years without answers. Then came the issue that divided public attention and intensified debate around the case. Hannah Thompson. Prosecutors acknowledged that Hannah was not present at the farmhouse when Caddy was killed. There was no evidence that she participated in the murder itself, but there was clear evidence that she helped John afterward. She traveled with him. She concealed information. She used false statements. She stayed silent while a murderer remained free. Hannah was charged with obstruction of justice and accessory-related offenses. Eventually, she pleaded guilty. The sentence she received, probation rather than prison, sparked outrage, particularly among Caddy's family. To them, Hannah had helped steal years of justice. She had shared in the freedom John enjoyed while their daughter lay in a grave. Whether Hannah was manipulated, coerced, or complicit became a question with no simple answer. The court moved on. After days of testimony, the jury deliberated, and when they returned, their verdict was clear. John Blauvelt was found guilty of murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. There would be no future appeals that changed the outcome. No second chance, no release date. The man who had controlled, threatened, and ultimately killed his wife would never walk free again. The verdict did not bring her back. It did not erase the fear she lived with before her death. It did not undo the knowledge that her final moments were spent with someone she once trusted. It simply closed a legal chapter that had remained open for far too long.